It'd be so nice to sleep for 5 years. What's up, everybody? My name is Erin. Welcome back to The Refuge. Today I'm talking about the third volume of the Husky and his White Cat, Shizun. And today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be attempting to explain what the frick happened in this book as I attempt to play this game at the same time. So please bear with my unceremonious cuts as I inevitably get distracted about what the frick is going on the screen and how not to die and lose all of my progress. I hope that you enjoy it. But anyway, let's get started. So this book starts just like the second one it started. So we're right back where we began. From the last book. So in the second book at the very end, Morun had just had an encounter with the mysterious man in black that cast some kind of virtue spell on him. And this is important. This is a thing that we need to remember, especially throughout this next book. Because it marks the turning point of the relationship between him and Chuaning, or more so the realization of Morun's feelings for Chuaning. Chuaning's kind of still like in the back there. He doesn't really know what the frick is going on. The virtue spell essentially makes Morun feel love and hate in a much more harsh manner, making it more obvious to him who he's been in love with this whole time. Before that though, the man in black casts a spell that makes sure that Morun does not remember that this happened to him. Honestly though, I think that went in Morun's favor instead of the mysterious man in black's favor. Because we've seen in previous volumes how untrusting Morun is when things tell him what his feelings are. Like that one time when his spiritual weapon was sealed in a box and they told him that it would only work if his true love opened the box, and he literally could not comprehend the fact that Chuaning had opened the box. So him not knowing that his own feelings are being portrayed sharper will help him realize his feelings better. So I think that kind of backstabbed the man in black a little bit. He's much more able to accept his feelings when he isn't aware of outside influences. This book opens with Morun waking up from that encounter all disoriented, and he turns over and the first scene of the book begins. And honestly, it's like it's not my favorite scene. It's quite disgusting. Actually, I won't go into it too deep, but it's the first time that Taekshun Jun forced himself onto Chuaning. Um, and yeah, it's pretty terrible. But anyway, they both wake up after that, and they end up returning to Shizun Peak, where they hear about trouble in Butterfly Town. At this point, people had come up from around that area to accuse Chuaning of murdering everybody there, because he was the last one with sufficient power that could have possibly done it. So, hearing that Butterfly Town has been massacred, they all go down there to see for themselves, and so the entire town is overrun by vicious ghosts that seem to be under the command of Lu Xianshen. Now, this was the same ghost that was taking revenge on the fact that she was left in the cold to basically freeze to death and die after the family that had taken her in wanted the son to have a marriage with somebody else. Chuaning ends up separating his soul from his body so that he can go talk to the ghost. Doesn't really work because the heavenly rift opens up above them, and Morun freaks out because nothing is panning out as it did in his original lifetime. In his original lifetime, the heavenly rift hadn't opened for another 3 years. So this is really off timing wise. But this is also where Shime had died. I would also say this is probably where the largest source of his grudge for Chuaning comes in. Because he doesn't want that to happen again, Moran goes and volunteers to be the one instead to help Chuaning fix the barrier to close the Heavenly Rift. The event happens exactly the same as it did in his previous lifetime, but instead of Shime being the one struck down, it is Moran. And Moran kind of lays there all bloody on the ground, dying, as he perceives Chuaning as he's walking away and kind of decides that he is being left for dead, just as Shime was. He loses consciousness and he wakes up right after, to his surprise, in she's sitting pink in his room with Shime, and they have this kind of stunted, weird conversation. Right before all of this, Moran had done a copycat move of the Shime in his past life, telling Shime that he has something important to tell him, and then saying, "Hey, if I feel like it, I'll tell you after this whole battle." So Shime tries to bring that up again. This is also where we kind of get some beginning little sus points here, because Shime seems kind of shocked that Moran is kind of unwilling to admit his feelings for Shime at this time. I think it explicitly talks about how Moran was just kind of like, I'm not feeling it right now. I know that I survived, but I don't want to talk about it. And Shime seems kind of disturbed about that, which is suspicious. So one sus point goes to Shime. Zhui Meng enters the room. And this is where just kind of everything hits the fan. They start arguing, which is normal for the two. Moran starts arguing about the fact that he thinks that he had been abandoned by his master, that his master doesn't care, Chuaning is so cold, left him to die. Shui Meng is absolutely destroyed about the fact that he's just basically tearing into Chuaning. And eventually he ends up telling him that Chuaning had died in the encounter. Not only had he died dragging Moran's unconscious body up the steps, up like the thousands of steps that it takes to get to the peak. Hearing this, Moran's brain kind of explodes. After he kind of has his little psychological break, he ends up going to the same high tongue, I'm gonna attempt to pronounce, tree that he had first seen Chuaning under before he was ever his disciple. He kind of sits on there, he relives the moment where Chuaning had died in the past. And it turns out that in both lifetimes, Chuaning just can't, he dies because of Moran in both. And Moran can't really mentally handle that at all. It took Chuaning dying twice for Moran to kind of see through everything that was going on. But it's not really like he can do anything about these feelings because Chuaning's dead. Because after he stops grieving for whoever knows how long, I assume it was the whole night, Moran leaves a tree and starts heading back to his room, but he is stopped by the arrival of a mysterious guest master that claims to have come to the peak for the benefit of an old friend. It's at this mention that Moran starts to suspect that maybe this might have something to do with his master. Um, once he figures out that this master's name was Huaizui, he starts to remember who he was, what he was capable in his past life. So this master had been known for this technique, one of the forbidden techniques called rebirth, which allowed someone to come back to life. And he had come to the peak because Chuaning was actually his disciple, and he wanted to repay him in some way. Honestly, this is another part where I kind of give Shime more sus points. Um, because the way he reacts during this whole entire section is super lackluster in comparison to Chuaning's other two um, disciples. If you've ever had doubts about Shui Meng's feelings toward their teacher, his reaction to Moran even getting the chance to save him should tell you enough about how upset he is that Chuaning is dead. Like, he literally tries to tear the opportunity out of Moran's hands. Like, he yells and screams at him. As for Moran, you are in his perspective the whole time, so you can see how distraught he is about this death. Shime, on the other hand, just kind of like stands there. He doesn't do anything. He kind of portrays concern, but like in comparison to the other two, it's nothing like it's there is no comparison to the other two. Like, there is even a point where he's trying to subtly convince Moran to not try to go and save Chuaning. Um, I don't know. He's just very sus during that whole section, but whatever. Anyway, it's about here that the whole process of rebirth begins. So I'm not gonna go too deep into these because these scenes are so much more impactful when you read them yourself. But I will say that the reveal with the wontons made both my brain and Modron's explode. But it puts a lot of other moments in this whole other perspective that utterly boggles my mind. Because wontons, or food in general, is a very common thing that people associate um, with others all the time. So it's super normal that Modron would attach that to a human. Super normal. And it was a major sense of comfort to him because he recalled eating them multiple times when he was under duress or under a lot of stress. But he always associated them with Shimei because he thought that he was the one making them. This turns out to be false. So to realize that Chuaning was actually the one responsible for them blew his mind. Like, that infamous memory that literally plays like 4 times throughout the course of these 3 books of Moran just tearing into Chuaning for daring to attempting to make wontons gets completely flipped on its head here. Honestly, if there's anything I can compliment the writing on, it's the execution of reveals, because this made me sad reading it. Like, I remember I just kind of sat there and was sad after securing that piece of his master soul in the lantern. Moran invades the underworld. Because he kind of has to convince each of the souls to go with him. So after he had talked a lot, and begged Chuaning's wandering wonton making soul, he was able to get him to come with him. But he starts to make his way to the underworld, and he has a lot of interesting encounters, including a glitchy sin measuring ruler and a literal starved artist that he tricks into drawing a portrait of Chuaning. Um, so with this portrait, he's able to show other souls, obviously, what he looks like, and that way he can find his master. Um, at some point, though, this portrait gets confused for another guy, and he ends up meeting Chu Shu. And if you don't remember who that guy is, he's the one guy in the, I think it was Peach Blossom Springs, when they went there to go train, and he looked so much like Chu Wanning, and him and his whole family had died because a heavenly rift had opened. But they end up meeting him, and he ends up helping him figure out where Chu Wanning's, the other piece of his soul, is. When he goes in that direction, Morun finds out that the piece of this piece of Chu Wanning's soul has been damaged. And so he can't exactly, he can't go back yet because it's still not a complete soul. So he goes back to Chushu, and he doesn't really have any more options, honestly, at this point. He still wants to find this other piece of his master soul. So he just kind of sits out into the underworld, showing random people the picture. He doesn't have much luck on the streets until this old man kind of points him in the direction of the fourth Ghost King's second palace, where he had sighted, where Chu Wanning had been sighted, basically. As he gets there, he runs into Rongju again. Now, if you guys don't remember him, he's that one androgynous looking guy that Morun woke up to in the second chapter of the entire, I'm going to call this cohesive novel. He shows up here again, except he's dead. Because he had died in the massacre of Butterfly Town. Basically had been tricked to go to Butterfly Town and get killed there with the other ghosts. Morun finds him there and starts interrogating him to figure out where Chuaning might be. Doesn't work. Morun doesn't know where he excuse me, Rongju doesn't know where he is. But he does presumably let him go at the time. Muran ends up finding Chu Wanning's room and practically begs that piece of his soul to go with him. And this piece is actually a lot more coherent than either the other two were. The first piece of his soul was just kind of mindlessly making wontons, going through the motions of that one moment of regret in his life. Whereas the other one was laying down, wasn't moving, couldn't speak, nothing happened. But this version of Chuaning is much like his normal self. The only thing he's missing, though, is cultivation. So that's why he couldn't escape from being held captive. So when Moran goes in to get him, he actually ends up freezing up under the revelation that Moran cares at all about him. So he leaves the poor kid hanging until the last possible second, and the guards start running toward their room to capture him. They escape via parkour, as I will call it, and they find Rongju again as they're running away. He basically kind of blackmails them into going and letting him go with them because he realizes he doesn't want to be there anymore. But once Rongju finds out that Moran is actually alive in the underworld, which is a big problem, he tries to sabotage their efforts of escape by telling Chuaning that Moran was still hanging out at brothels in recent times, even though Moran had told him that he hadn't done such a thing in a really long time. Chu Wenning obviously gets mad at Moran. They have this whole thing, this whole fight. Rongju kind of runs away for a little bit, trying to gain a little bit of support with the guards. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I don't love this from Chuan. Granted, Moran does feel like he has a lot more progress in this book, because he has all this hindsight of his past life, and he can kind of see the hindsight of his feelings for the other man. But I just found Chuaning to be kind of unbearable right here. Like, we know he cares. Why does he have to be so I don't have another word for unbearable when it comes to Moran misbehaving, as I will say. Like, this guy is literally trying to bring you back to life. The least you could do is try to help him and go with him. Like, why do we have to go through even more pain of fighting and distrust when your literal souls are on the line? But I have a feeling Chuan's gonna get over it later. It was just a little bit, like, the timing was just so bad. Like, can't he just get over himself for like 2 seconds? Anyway, they end up escaping a little bit farther to the exit of the palace. Rongju gets captured by the guards, where they tell him that basically his efforts were futile and he was going to be punished for trying to run away himself. And that is presumably the last we ever hear of Rongju. Meanwhile, the pair is confronted by the fourth Ghost King, with the Ghost King in front of them and this impassable barrier behind them. Chu Wanning and Moran appear to be in this sort of stalemate. But this all changes when the Ghost King starts explaining the rules of the barrier. Basically, he says that any soul that is wearing his wedding robes, which at this time Chu Wanning was wearing them because he was going to become part of the Soul King's harem. Anyone who is wearing those robes cannot pass through the barrier because they are now seen as property of the fourth Soul King. But this does not apply to anyone who has been previously married, because the fourth Soul King just doesn't take married people. He doesn't like married people. So, looking back on this, Moren ends up pulling Chuan to the barrier anyway. Because way back in the first book, we go back to the first encounter with Butterfly Town, and when they had gone to take care of the false ghost bride or whatever, they had actually gotten married. If we remember way back to the first book, Chuan kind of considers this as garbage. Like, there's no way we were actually married. That was just fake. Moran, though, is considering everything as real, especially with this hope that he can get Chuaning out. All the vows were right. They said all the vows. They bowed to all their ancestors, the heavens, the earth. He considers their marriage to be legitimate and pulls him towards the barrier. Long story short, they make it past the barrier, but as they do, the moon comes out of the clouds and reveals the fact that Moran has a shadow, which ghosts do not have, exposing him as a living human. After they do some more fancy parkour, they find a space spot. Moran combines Chuaning's soul in the lantern, and they return to the world of the living. And Moran is unceremoniously told that Chuaning will not awake for the next 5 years. And with that, the book ends. And honestly, I think I like the second volume better. I'm not gonna lie. There was a lot of angst in this one. Not that the second one wasn't angsty. I think I noted that the second one was pretty angsty, but this one, like the uncomfortable moments were just really uncomfortable. The angst was just really sharp. The growth of Chu Aning versus Moran emotionally feels really stark. Um, Granted, I acknowledge that this section of the book seems to be a lot more focused on breaking Moran's misconception that he didn't have any feelings for his teacher. Feelings in general, not just like romantic feelings. But honestly, you'd think after dragging this kid's body over thousands of steps and dying for him, that Chuaning would have enough face to admit that he likes the guy, you know? Um, That being said, I do love Meng in this section. I think he deserves more screen time. That kid, he may be a brat, but he cares, and you can see that he cares in this book. He was actually one of my favorite parts, just watching him tear into Moran, because honestly, he deserved it too. Um, as for my favorite line, that would belong on page 189. And that is when Shuimeng is ripping into Moran. And he says, if anything happens to Shizun, I'll personally lay your corpse at his grave. I wish I could see that. I feel like that would be awesome. My favorite chapter was chapter 104. That is the Wonton chapter. As for the general ratings, the first one on the sexy rating, I'm giving that a -3. That was just sad, disgusting, and sad. Angst, I'm giving that a full 10, and overall, I'm giving this section, volume 3, a 6 out of 5. Yeah, I didn't like this one as much as the last one, as I've said before, but hey, it is merely a section of the whole book. Yeah, and honestly, this is where I see most of the issues with splitting such a massive novel into smaller parts, because it makes certain sections feel so much starker in comparison to others. Like, I had a problem with Chuaning being so harsh in this one in comparison to Moran, because there's no other comparison, even though it seems like there should, because so much had happened and they had both done very impactful things. But the issue was that we just don't get to see that in this section. Whereas if you were reading the whole cohesive novel in one bit, you could see how both of those events had affected Moran and Chuaning in positive emotional growth. Um, but because it's so stilted, and the finality of having them in separate books, even though you literally could just go and pick up the next volume like right next to you after you finish it, because of the physical split, it feels so much more sharp. It's really pointedly focused on Moran's feelings with about Chuaning, and how he's denied them for so long, and how when it finally all comes to a head, it just kind of overflows into this desperation to save him. And it feels like the growth feels so one-sided because we don't see it in a cohesive manner. But it feels different because I have to pick up a separate book. Like, it feels thematically different, even though the theme of the whole book is one thing. It gets a different feeling because it is physically split. Anyway, I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna stop on my rant of that. If you like this video, let me know. I'm sorry I kind of stopped playing towards the end of it. I just kind of got caught up in talking. But this is also exactly what I look like when I stream this game on Twitch. I'll put the link in the description below. I'll see you next time.